Charlotte Bennett was supposed to be walking down the aisle, but instead she's running barefoot down a country road, her $15,000 wedding dress in tatters. With nowhere to go, she stumbles upon Stone Ridge stables and a gruff rancher who has no patience for runaway brides. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Charlotte Bennett stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror of the church's bridal suite. The woman looking back at her was barely recognizable beneath layers of expensive makeup and a custom-designed wedding gown that cost more than most people's cars. Her blonde hair had been twisted into an elaborate updo that was already giving her a headache, and the diamond tiara pinning her veil in place felt like it weighed a ton. "5 minutes, Miss Bennett," called the wedding planner from outside the door. "Your father is waiting to walk you down the aisle." Charlotte nodded, though no one could see her. She was alone in the room, having sent her bridesmaids, mostly society girls she barely knew, to take their places. She needed these final moments to herself. "This is a mistake," she whispered to her reflection. "You know it's a mistake." Richard Blackwood, her fiancé of 9 months, was handsome, charming, and ruthlessly ambitious. The merger between his investment firm and her father's banking empire would create one of the most powerful financial institutions in the country. It was the perfect match, on paper. Charlotte had agreed to the marriage mostly to please her ailing father, who dreamed of seeing his only daughter settled before his heart condition worsened. But in the months leading up to the wedding, she'd caught glimpses of Richard's true nature. The cold calculation in his eyes when he spoke about her inheritance, the cruel way he dismissed the household staff, the business calls where he boasted about crushing small companies just because he could. Last night at the rehearsal dinner, she'd overheard him speaking to his best man. "Once the old man kicks it, all those Bennett millions come to me. Just need to make sure the prenup has the right loopholes." Charlotte felt sick remembering his words. She wasn't just a bride to him, she was an acquisition. A knock at the door made her jump. "Charlotte, are you ready, sweetheart?" Her father's voice was weak but warm. "Everyone's waiting." She looked down at her trembling hands, at the enormous diamond engagement ring that felt more like a shackle than a symbol of love. "Dad, She opened the door and saw her father, George Bennett, leaning heavily on his cane, his face pale but smiling proudly. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes misting. "Just like your mother did on our wedding day." Charlotte's heart squeezed. Her mother had died when she was 12, and her father had raised her alone, despite his demanding career. He'd never remarried, claiming that true love came once in a lifetime. "Dad, I need to ask you something," Charlotte said, her voice barely audible. "Were you and Mom happy? Really happy?" George Bennett's smile softened. Every day with her was a gift, even when times were tough. That's how you know it's right, when even the hard days feel worthwhile because you're facing them together. Charlotte swallowed hard. "And if Mom hadn't loved you back, would you have wanted her to marry you anyway?" Her father's expression grew serious. "What kind of question is that?" "Of course not. I would never—" Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Charlotte, is there something you're not telling me about Richard?" Before she could answer, the wedding planner appeared behind her father. "We really must proceed, Mr. Bennett. The guests are getting restless and Mr. Blackwood is waiting at the altar." Charlotte felt trapped, the walls of the small room closing in. 300 guests, the society photographers, Richard's smugly confident face waiting for her at the end of the aisle. "I need some air," she gasped, pushing past the wedding planner. "Charlotte." Her father called after her, but she was already running, lifting her gown's heavy skirts to free her legs. She darted down a side hallway, found a back exit, and burst into the cool evening air. The church garden was deserted, everyone inside, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Without stopping to think, Charlotte kicked off her heels, unclipped her veil, and ran. She had no plan, no destination in mind. All she knew was that she couldn't marry Richard Blackwood. She couldn't spend the rest of her life as a trophy wife to a man who saw her as nothing more than a business transaction. The church was on the outskirts of town, and within minutes, Charlotte found herself on a country road. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Her feet ached from running on the rough pavement. Her elaborate hairstyle was coming undone, and her pristine white dress was already smudged with dirt. She slowed to a walk. When she could no longer see the church behind her, what had she done? Where would she go? Her purse, phone and wallet were all back in the bridal suite. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, a $15,000 wedding gown that was getting more ruined with every step. As darkness fell, Charlotte began to worry. She'd grown up in Meadowbrook, but had always been driven everywhere. These back roads were unfamiliar, and she had no way to call for help. Would Richard come looking for her? Probably not personally, but he might send someone. The thought made her walk faster despite her sore feet. After what felt like hours, Charlotte spotted lights in the distance. Drawing closer, she realized it was a large farmhouse set back from the road. Behind it, she could make out several outbuildings and what looked like a fenced pasture. A sign at the end of the gravel driveway read, "Stone Ridge Stables." Charlotte hesitated. Should she knock on the door and ask for help? But what would she say? That she was a runaway bride who'd just left a wealthy fiancé at the altar. In her current state, disheveled, barefoot, in a torn wedding dress, she looked more deranged than distressed. A dog barked in the distance, making her jump. Charlotte hurried past the main house, which was mostly dark except for a light in an upstairs window. Behind the house, she spotted a large stable building. The wide double doors were partially open, spilling warm yellow light onto the ground. Charlotte approached cautiously and peered inside. The stable was clean and well-maintained, with a row of stalls on either side of a center aisle. Most of the stalls were occupied by horses, some of which turned to look at her with curious eyes. It was warm inside, and the sweet smell of hay was oddly comforting. Charlotte slipped through the doors and looked around. At the far end of the stable was what appeared to be a small office or tack room. No one seemed to be around. "Hello?" she called softly, but only the gentle shuffling of horses answered her. Charlotte was exhausted. Her feet were bleeding, her head pounded, and the emotional toll of the day had left her drained. She needed to rest just for a little while. Then she would figure out what to do next. She found an empty stall at the end of the row. It was clean with fresh straw covering the floor. A stack of horse blankets sat folded on a shelf. Charlotte's entire body ached for rest. Surely it wouldn't hurt to stay just for tonight. In the morning she would... Well, she didn't know what she would do, but she'd figure something out. Charlotte spread one of the blankets over the straw, then covered herself with another. The scratchy wool was nothing like the fine silk sheets she was used to, but at that moment it felt like heaven. Within minutes, she was asleep. "What the hell?" The deep male voice jolted Charlotte awake. Sunlight streamed through. The stable windows and a tall figure stood in the stall doorway, silhouetted against the light. Charlotte scrambled to a sitting position, clutching the horse blanket to her chest. Her wedding dress, once pristine white, was now a sorry mess of dirt, grass stains, and wrinkles. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to trespass. I just needed somewhere to sleep." The man stepped closer, and Charlotte got her first good look at him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble and deep-set eyes that studied her with a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. "Lady, this is private property," he said gruffly. "You can't just break in," and he stopped, taking in her bedraggled appearance and the ruins of her wedding gown. "Is that a wedding dress?" Charlotte stood up, wincing as her sore feet touched the ground. "Yes, I was supposed to get married yesterday." "Supposed to?" The man raised an eyebrow. "I ran away," Charlotte admitted. The man's expression hardened. "Look, I don't know what kind of domestic dispute you're involved in, but you can't hide out here. I run a business, not a shelter for runaway brides." "Please," Charlotte said. "I just needed a place to stay for the night. I'll leave right away." She tried to step forward but stumbled, her feet still raw from running barefoot. The man instinctively reached out to steady her, his calloused hand gripping her arm. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Charlotte was struck by the rich brown color of his, like dark amber in the morning light. He let go quickly and stepped back. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. I lost my shoes when I ran. The man sighed, running, a hand through his dark hair in frustration. Wait here. He disappeared, leaving Charlotte alone in the stall. She took the opportunity to attempt to smooth her hair and brush some of the straw from her dress, though it was a hopeless cause. She must look like a complete mess. The man returned, a few minutes later with a first aid kit and a pair of battered work boots. Sit, he commanded, pointing to a wooden bench just outside the stall. Charlotte obeyed, too tired to argue. The man knelt in front of her and carefully lifted one of her feet, examining the cuts and blisters that covered the soft skin. You're not used to going barefoot, are you? He asked, his voice slightly softer as he opened the first aid kit. No, Charlotte admitted. I've never what? Run away from your own wedding? There was a hint of judgment in his tone. Never had to run for more than a few minutes on a treadmill, she finished quietly. The man snorted but said nothing, as he cleaned her wounds with antiseptic that stung fiercely. Charlotte bit her lip to keep from crying out. When he was done, he handed her the boots. These are too big, but they're better than nothing. There's a bathroom at the end of the stable, where you can clean up. Then I expect you to be on your way. Thank you, Charlotte said, slipping on the boots. They were indeed several sizes too large, but the relief of having something between her injured feet and the ground was immense. I appreciate your help, Mr. Stonebridge, Jack Stonebridge. He stood up, towering over her. And you are? Charlotte hesitated. If she gave her real name, he might recognize it. The Bennets were well known in Meadowbrook, and her failed wedding would certainly be headline news by now. Charlie, she said, using the nickname only her mother had ever called her. Charlie. White. Jack looked skeptical, but didn't press the issue. Well, Charlie White, get yourself cleaned up, then you need to leave. I've got work to do. He walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly down the stable aisle. Charlotte watched him go, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and apprehension. He had helped her, but he clearly wanted her gone. And where would she go? She had no money, no phone, and was wearing a ruined wedding dress and oversized work boots. She found the small bathroom at the end of the stable. It was basic but clean, with a sink, toilet, and a cracked mirror on the wall. Charlotte gasped when she saw her reflection. Her carefully applied makeup was smeared, giving her a ghoulish appearance. Her blonde hair, which had been elegantly styled for the wedding, now hung in tangled strands around her face. And her dress, the custom-made gown that had cost a small fortune, was beyond salvation. Charlotte did her best to clean up, washing her face and using her fingers to comb through her hair. There was nothing to be done about the dress except to try brushing off the worst of the dirt. When she emerged from the bathroom, she found Jack leading a beautiful chestnut horse from one of the stalls. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "I know. You want me to leave, but I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have money or a phone, and I can't exactly walk into town looking like this." Jack turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "That's not my problem." "I could work," Charlotte blurted out, "to pay you back for letting me stay. Just until I figure things out." Jack laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "You? Work? Have you ever done a day's manual labor in your life?" Charlotte felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "No," she admitted, "but I can learn." "Look, Halady." "Charlie," she corrected him. "Charlie," he said with exaggerated patience, "this is a working stable. I breed and train horses. It's hard, dirty work that starts before dawn and often doesn't end until after dark. It's not a place for someone like you, someone like me." Charlotte felt a flicker of anger. "You don't know anything about me." "I know a city girl when I see one," Jack replied. "And I know that dress you're wearing probably cost more than I make in a month. Whatever you're running from, this isn't the answer." "Please," Charlotte said, hating the desperation in her voice but unable to hide it. "Just give me a chance one day. If I can't keep up, I'll leave and never bother you again." Jack studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. The horse beside him nudged his arm impatiently. "You have any experience with horses?" he asked finally. "I took riding lessons as a child," Charlotte offered. It wasn't exactly a lie. She'd been enrolled in an exclusive equestrian program for exactly 2 weeks. Before her father decided it was too dangerous and pulled her out, Jack seemed to be weighing his options. Finally, he sighed. "One day," he agreed reluctantly. "But first you need something else to wear. You look like a horror movie bride in that get-up." Relief flooded through Charlotte. "Thank you, you won't regret it." "I already do," Jack muttered, turning back to the horse. "There's a house just past the main stable. My sister stays there when she visits. You'll find clothes in the bedroom. Help yourself to whatever fits. When you're done, come find me. And make it quick, there's work to be done." Charlotte couldn't believe her luck. "Your sister won't mind. Lisa leaves clothes here all the time. She owes me a few favors anyway." Jack gave her a stern look. "One day, Charlie, that's all you get." Charlotte nodded eagerly. "One day." She hurried out of the stable, following Jack's directions to the small guest house. It was a cozy cottage with a wraparound porch, much simpler than the main farmhouse, but still charming. Inside, she found a bedroom with a closet full of women's clothing. Jack's sister seemed to favor practical items: jeans, t-shirts, flannel shirts, and sturdy boots. Charlotte selected a pair of jeans that were slightly too big. She secured them with a belt and a simple blue t-shirt. The boots were close enough to her size to be comfortable. After changing, Charlotte stared at her wedding dress crumpled on the floor. It represented everything she'd been running from: expectations, obligations, a life planned out for her by others. On impulse, she stuffed it into the back of the closet. She would deal with it later. Looking in the mirror, Charlotte barely recognized herself. Without makeup, in borrowed clothes, with her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, she looked like a different person. Not Charlotte Bennett, heiress and society darling, but Charlie White, whoever that was. For the first time since fleeing the church, Charlotte felt a sense of possibility. One day, Jack had said, one day to prove she could be useful, that she could work hard, that she was more than just a rich girl running from her problems. One day to start a new life. She took a deep breath and headed back to the stable, ready to begin. Jack Stoneridge had encountered plenty of strange situations in his 35 years, but finding a runaway bride sleeping in his stable was definitely a first. As he watched Charlie emerge from his sister's guest house, transformed from bedraggled society princess to would-be farmhand, he wondered what he'd gotten himself into. There was something about her, a desperate determination in those blue eyes, that had stopped him from calling the sheriff. That, and the unmistakable fear that had flashed across her face when he'd suggested it. She was running from something, or someone, and despite his better judgment, Jack found himself curious. Not that it mattered. She'd last half a day, at most, before those soft hands blistered and that determination crumbled. Then she'd be gone, back to whatever privileged life she'd temporarily escaped, and his stable would return to normal. "So," Charlie said, approaching him with an eager smile that caught him off guard. "Where do we start?" Jack gestured to the row of stalls. "Mucking out. Every stall needs to be cleaned daily. Fresh straw, fresh water, fresh feed." Her smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "Show me how." For the next hour, Jack demonstrated how to properly clean a stall, explaining each step as he worked. To his surprise, Charlie paid close attention, asking intelligent questions and watching his technique. "Carefully." "Your turn," he said, handing her a pitchfork. "Start with the next stall. I'll be working with Bella if you need me." He pointed to the chestnut mare waiting patiently in the center aisle. Charlie took the pitchfork with determination. "I can do this." Jack seriously doubted it, but he left her to it, leading Bella outside to the training ring. He glanced back, once to see Charlie already at work, her face set in concentration as she tackled the soiled straw. An hour later, when Jack returned from working with Bella, he was shocked to find Charlie had cleaned not one, but 3 stalls. Her work wasn't perfect. She'd missed some spots and used too much fresh straw, but it was far better than he'd expected. She was sweating, her borrowed t-shirt damp and dirt-smudged, and her hands were already showing signs of blisters, but she didn't complain. "Not bad," Jack admitted grudgingly, "but you're using too much straw. That stuff doesn't grow on trees." "Actually, it kind of does," Charlie replied with a small smile. "Or on stalks, at least." The unexpected bit of humor caught Jack by surprise, and he found himself fighting back a smile of his own. "Smart Alec. Come on, I'll show you how to measure feed. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of chores. Jack kept waiting for Charlie to quit, to complain about the work or the dirt or the smell, but she tackled each task with the same quiet determination. By noon, her hands were raw, her face was streaked with sweat and dust, and she was moving more slowly, but she didn't stop. "Lunch," Jack announced, leading the way to the farmhouse kitchen. "Hope you like sandwiches, because that's what we've got." The kitchen was large but simple, with worn countertops and dated appliances. Jack quickly assembled 2 sandwiches and placed one in front of Charlie, who had collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table. "Thank you," she said, wincing slightly as she flexed her blistered hands. Jack retrieved a tube of medicated ointment from a drawer and tossed it to her. "For your hands. If you're going to keep working, you'll need it." Charlie looked up in surprise. "You mean I passed the test?" "I didn't say that," Jack replied, taking a bite of his sandwich. "The day's only half over." She applied the ointment to her raw palms. "Can I ask you something?" Jack shrugged. "Free country." "How long have you had this place?" "The farm's been in my family for 3 generations," Jack answered. "My grandfather built it, my father expanded it, and I've been running it since my dad retired 5 years ago." "Do you live here alone?" Jack narrowed his eyes. "Why all the questions?" Charlie looked down at her sandwich. "Just trying to make conversation." "Well, I'm not much for conversation," Jack said bluntly, "and I'm not in the habit of sharing my life story with strangers who break into my stable." "I didn't break in," Charlie protested. "The door was open." "Semantics." Jack finished his sandwich and stood up. "Break's over. The afternoon feed needs to be prepared, and then there are 2 new horses arriving that need to be settled in." Charlie rose from her chair, determination returning to her face despite the obvious fatigue in her movements. "I'm ready." As the afternoon wore on, Jack found himself reluctantly impressed by Charlie's persistence. She was clearly exhausted, her movements growing slower and clumsier, but she didn't quit. When one of the new horses, a skittish bay gelding, shied away from her, she didn't panic. Instead, she stood still, speaking softly until the horse calmed down enough to accept her touch. "You're not completely hopeless with horses," Jack commented as they walked back to the stable. "Those riding lessons must have taught you something." Charlie looked away, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. "I've always loved animals. They're honest, they don't pretend to be something they're not." There was a story there, Jack thought, but he didn't press. Everyone had secrets, and hers were none of his business. As sunset approached, Jack called an end to the workday. "That's enough," he told Charlie, who was struggling to carry a heavy water bucket. "You can stay another night in the Boer guest house. We'll figure out what to do with you tomorrow." Charlie set down the bucket, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Does that mean I passed your test?" Jack considered her for a moment. The pampered city girl he'd found that morning was gone, replaced by a dirt-smudged, exhausted woman who had worked harder than he ever would have expected. "You didn't fail," he admitted. "But this was one day. A real ranch hand needs to do this every day, rain or shine, sick or well." "I can do it," Charlie insisted, though she swayed slightly with fatigue. "We'll see." Jack turned to leave, then paused. "There's food in the guest house fridge. Get some rest. Morning comes early around here." He walked away before she could respond, heading toward his own house with mixed emotions. Charlie White, if that was even her real name, was trouble. The kind of trouble that showed up unexpectedly and complicated an otherwise simple life. He had no business getting involved in whatever drama she was running from, and yet he couldn't shake the image of her determined face as she worked through pain and exhaustion without complaint. There was something there, a strength he hadn't expected. That intrigued him despite his better judgment. "One more day," Jack muttered to himself as he climbed the steps to his porch. "Then she's gone." But even as he said it, he wasn't entirely convinced he meant it. Charlotte collapsed onto the small bed in the guest house, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. She couldn't remember ever being this physically exhausted. Growing up, the most strenuous activities she'd participated in were tennis lessons and the occasional yoga class. Nothing had prepared her for the grueling reality of farm work. But despite the pain, despite the blisters and the sore muscles and the bone-deep fatigue, Charlotte felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time in her life, she had accomplished something real, something tangible, through her own hard work. She looked down at her hands, soft, manicured hands that had never known labor until today. The blisters were ugly, painful reminders of her inadequacy for this kind of work. But they were also badges of honor, proof that she could do more than she'd ever been allowed to try. Charlotte thought about Jack Stoneridge as she ate the simple meal she found in the refrigerator. He was nothing like the men in her social circle. Nothing like Richard, with his polished manners and calculated charm. Jack was rough-edged, direct to the point of rudeness and clearly unimpressed by her, and yet there had been moments throughout the day when she'd caught glimpses of something else beneath his gruff exterior. The patience he showed with the horses. The way his hands, strong enough to haul heavy equipment without effort, could be incredibly gentle when tending to a nervous foal. The quiet pride in his voice when he spoke about his family's legacy. Charlotte wondered what he would say if he knew who she really was, if he knew that Charlie White was actually Charlotte Bennett, whose face had probably been splashed across every local news outlet by now, the society heiress who'd left Richard Blackwood waiting at the altar. Richard. Charlotte's stomach churned. At the thought of him, would he be looking for her? Almost certainly. Not out of love or concern, but because she had embarrassed him, had cost him the merger and the Bennett fortune he'd been counting on. And what about her father? Guilt washed over Charlotte as she imagined his worry. She needed to let him know. She was safe, but she couldn't risk exposing her whereabouts, not yet. Not until she figured out what she was going to do next. As exhaustion pulled her toward sleep, Charlotte made a decision. She would prove to Jack and to herself that she wasn't just a rich girl playing at being independent. She would earn her place here, even if it was just for a little while. And maybe in the process she would figure out who Charlie White really was, beneath the expectations and obligations that had defined Charlotte Bennett's entire life. With that thought, she surrendered to sleep, dreaming of chestnut horses and a pair of deep amber eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. Charlotte woke before sunrise, her body protesting every movement, muscles she didn't even know she had ached fiercely as she forced herself out of bed. The blisters on her hands had formed painful calluses overnight, and her borrowed work boots felt like lead weights on her feet. But she was determined not to be late on her second day. She quickly dressed in another set of clothes from Jack's sister's closet. Jeans, a flannel shirt, and a light jacket to ward off the morning chill. After splashing cold water on her face and pulling her hair into a ponytail, she headed toward the stable. To her surprise, Jack was already outside, leaning against the fence of a small paddock, a steaming mug in his hand. He looked up as she approached, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "You're up early," he commented, taking a sip from his mug. "I didn't want to be late," Charlotte replied, trying to hide how sore she was by standing straighter. Jack studied her for a moment, then held out his mug. "Coffee?" Charlotte accepted it gratefully, wrapping her sore hands around the warm ceramic. The coffee was strong and black, not the fancy latte she was used to, but the warmth and caffeine were welcome. "You look like you got hit by a truck," Jack observed bluntly. Charlotte couldn't help but laugh. "I feel like it too. Farm work isn't for everyone. No shame in admitting it's too much." There was a challenge in his voice that sparked Charlotte's determination. "I'm fine," she insisted, handing back the mug. "What's first on the agenda today?" Jack looked skeptical, but nodded toward the stable. "Same as yesterday. Stalls need cleaning. Horses need feeding." Charlotte nodded and headed toward the tools she'd used the day before. Each movement sent pain shooting through her overworked muscles, but she gritted her teeth and kept going. She wouldn't give Jack the satisfaction of seeing her quit. By mid-morning, Charlotte had settled into a rhythm. The work was no less demanding, but she was learning tricks to make it more efficient. She found that if she positioned the wheelbarrow just so, she could save herself extra steps. If she kept her back straight while lifting, her muscles protested. Les Jack worked alongside her most of the morning, occasionally offering gruff corrections to her technique, but otherwise saying little. Charlotte was aware of his eyes on her, evaluating, measuring, waiting for her to break. Around noon, Jack disappeared into the house and returned with 2 sandwiches and bottles of water. They sat on a bench outside the stable to eat. "You're doing better today," Jack admitted, finishing his sandwich in a few large bites. Still slow, but better. Coming from him, it felt like high praise. "Thanks," Charlotte said, trying not to show how much his approval meant to her. "I'm a quick learner. We'll see." Jack crushed his empty water bottle and stood. "Got a delivery coming in an hour. Feed supplies. You can help unload." The feed delivery turned out to be several tons of hay, grain, and other supplies that needed to be unloaded from a large truck and stored properly in the barn. It was backbreaking work, and by the time they finished, Charlotte's muscles were screaming in protest. But she hadn't complained once, and she saw a new respect in Jack's eyes as they closed the barn doors. "Not bad," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Thought for sure you'd quit halfway through." "I told you I could do this," Charlotte replied. Unable to keep a hint of pride from her voice, Jack almost smiled, almost. "Day's not over yet. Got 3 horses that need exercising before dinner." Charlotte's heart sank. In her exhausted state, the thought of handling a 1,000-pound animal was intimidating. But she'd come too far to back down now. "I told you I took riding lessons as a child," she reminded him. "Yeah, well, these aren't posh riding school ponies," Jack warned. "These are working horses. But I'll put you on Daisy. She's gentle enough." Daisy turned out to be a placid grey mare with kind eyes, who seemed to sense Charlotte's nervousness. Under Jack's watchful eye, Charlotte saddled the horse, only needing his help with the final tightening of the girth. "You remember how to mount?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. Charlotte nodded, though in truth her childhood lessons were a distant memory. She placed her foot in the stirrup and hoisted herself up, settling into the saddle with more confidence. Then she felt. "Walk her around the paddock a few times," Jack instructed. "Get a feel for her movement, then we'll head out to the north pasture." To Charlotte's relief, riding came back to her more naturally than she'd expected. Daisy responded to the lightest touch, and soon Charlotte felt comfortable enough to follow Jack, who was mounted on a spirited black gelding, out of the paddock and toward a trail that led away from the stable. The land around Stoneridge Stables was beautiful, with rolling hills, scattered copses of trees, and wide-open fields where several other horses grazed peacefully. As they rode side by side along a well-worn trail, Charlotte felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Your family owns all this?" she asked, taking in the expansive property. Jack nodded. 200 acres. My grandfather started with just 20 and the main house, built it all from nothing. You must be very proud of it. It's home," Jack said simply. Then, after a pause, "What about you? Where's home for Charlie White?" The question caught Charlotte off guard. I grew up in the city," she said carefully, which wasn't a lie. Meadowbrook was hardly a metropolis, but compared to this rural setting, it might as well have been. "New York." "And the wedding?" Jack pressed. "The one you ran away from?" Charlotte stared straight ahead, focusing on Daisy's ears. "I made a mistake. I agreed to marry someone I didn't love." "Why would you do that?" "It's complicated." Charlotte sighed. "My father, he's not well. He wanted to see me settled before—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Jack was quiet for a moment. "So you were sacrificing your happiness for his?" It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Charlotte felt a lump forming in her throat. "But then I realized my fiancé didn't love me either. He just wanted She caught herself. "He just wanted financial security." "And now?" Jack asked. "What's your plan?" Charlotte laughed hollowly. "I don't have one. For the first time in my life, I have absolutely no idea what comes next." Jack studied her with those intense amber eyes. Sometimes no plan is better than a bad one. They rode in companionable silence after that, exercising the horses through fields and along tree-lined paths. By the time they returned to the stable, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. As they dismounted, Charlotte's legs nearly buckled beneath her. 2 days of unaccustomed physical labor had taken their toll, and the riding had been the final straw. She grabbed the saddle to steady herself. Jack was at her side immediately, one strong hand gripping her elbow. "Whoa there," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "You okay?" Charlotte nodded, embarrassed by her weakness. "Just Tired? Come on, Jack said, keeping his hand on her arm. I think you've earned a real dinner, not just another sandwich. He led her to the main house, a two-story farmhouse with a wide front porch. Inside, the decor was simple, but comfortable. Worn. Leather furniture, handmade quilts, and family photos lining the walls. It was nothing like the luxurious mansion Charlotte had grown up in, but there was a warmth to it that felt immediately welcoming. The kitchen was large and homey, with a big wooden table at its center. Jack gestured for Charlotte to sit while he pulled ingredients from the refrigerator. You cook? She asked, surprised. Don't sound so shocked, Jack replied with a hint of humor. I live alone. It was either learn to cook or live on microwave dinners. Can I help? Charlotte offered. Jack gave her a skeptical look. You know how to cook? Charlotte hesitated. The truth was she didn't. There had always been household staff to prepare meals in the Bennett home. I could learn, she said hopefully. To her surprise, Jack chuckled. All right, city girl, come here. I'll teach you to make a proper country omelette. For the next half hour, Jack patiently showed Charlotte how to chop vegetables, whisk eggs, and manage the heavy cast-iron skillet. His hands occasionally covered hers to demonstrate the proper technique, and each time, Charlotte felt a strange flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. The meal they prepared together was simple but delicious. Fluffy omelettes, stuffed with cheese, peppers, and onions, served with thick slices of homemade bread. They ate at the kitchen table, the silence between them now comfortable rather than awkward. So, Jack said finally, pushing his empty plate away. You survived. 2 days, that's longer than I expected. Charlotte smiled. Does that mean I can stay a little longer? Jack leaned back in his chair, considering her. I could use the help, he admitted. My regular hand, Tom, is laid up with a broken leg for another few weeks. But I can't afford to pay much. Room and board is enough, Charlotte said quickly, at least for now. Jack studied her for a long moment. What are you running from, Charlie, or should I say who? Charlotte froze. What do you mean? You're clearly hiding from someone. You gave me a fake name. Don't bother denying it, I can. See it in your face. You're afraid to go into town. You haven't once asked to use a phone. Jack's expression was serious. Are you in trouble? Is someone looking for you? Charlotte looked down at her plate. Yes, she admitted softly, but not for the reasons you might think. I haven't done anything wrong. I just needed to disappear for a while. Are you in danger? Charlotte thought about Richard, about his cold fury when his plans were thwarted. Would he actually harm her? Physically, she didn't think so, but the truth was she didn't really know him at all. Not immediately, she answered carefully. But I can't go back. Not yet. Jack seemed to weigh her words. I don't like secrets, Charlie. Never have. But everyone deserves a second chance. He stood up and carried their plates to the sink. You can stay. Work for room and board until you figure things out. But if there's trouble, real trouble, I need to know about it. Relief washed over Charlotte. Thank you, Jack. I promise I won't cause any problems. See that you don't. His tone was gruff, but there was a softness in his eyes that gave Charlotte hope. Guest house is yours for as long as you need it. Lisa hardly ever uses it anymore anyway. Your sister, does she visit often? Jack shook his head. She lives in Chicago now, big shot lawyer. Comes back for holidays and sometimes in the summer if she can get away. There was pride in his voice as he spoke of his sister. We're different as night and day, but she's a good kid. You two must be close, Charlotte observed. It was just us growing up after Mom died, Jack said, his back to her as he washed the dishes. Dad was busy with the farm. We had to look out for each other. Charlotte wanted to ask more about his family, but sensed it was a tender subject. Instead, she rose and joined him at the sink. Let me dry, she offered, picking up a dish towel. They worked in companionable silence. Charlotte carefully drying each dish and putting it away where Jack directed. It was such a simple domestic task, but somehow it felt significant, as if they were establishing a routine, a partnership of sorts. When the kitchen was clean, Jack walked Charlotte back to the guest house. The night was clear, stars shining brilliantly in the dark sky in a way Charlotte had never seen in the city. Morning comes early, Jack reminded her as they reached the guest house door. 5:30 sharp, Charlotte nodded. I'll be ready. Jack hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more, but then simply nodded. Good night, Charlie. Good night, Jack, Charlotte replied, watching as he walked back toward the main house, his tall figure silhouetted against the starlit sky. Inside, the guest house, Charlotte collapsed onto the bed, every muscle in her body crying out for rest. But despite her exhaustion, she felt a strange sense of contentment. For the first time in her life, she had earned her place. No one had given her this opportunity because of her name or her father's money. Jack had allowed her to stay because she had proven herself capable, because she had worked harder than she ever had before. As she drifted off to sleep, Charlotte wondered what her father would think if he could see her now, filthy from a day's labor, hands calloused, muscles aching, and happier than she'd been in years. The days fell into a rhythm. Charlotte rose before dawn, worked alongside Jack through the morning chores, took a brief break for lunch, then continued with afternoon tasks until sunset. The work was still hard, but her body was adapting. Blisters became calluses. Sore muscles grew stronger. Tasks that had once seemed insurmountable became routine. Jack, too, was changing. His gruff demeanor softened, not dramatically, but noticeably. He spoke more, smiled occasionally, and seemed genuinely impressed by Charlotte's determination and quick learning. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, Charlotte would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something between curiosity and admiration. 2 weeks after her arrival at Stonebridge Stables, Jack announced at breakfast that they needed to go into town for supplies. Town? Charlotte echoed, anxiety immediately bubbling up. Both of us? Jack raised an eyebrow. Problem? Charlotte hesitated. She hadn't left the farm since her arrival. The outside world and the scandal she'd left behind seemed distant, almost unreal, but she couldn't hide forever. No, she said finally. No problem. An hour later, they were in Jack's pickup truck, bouncing down the long driveway toward the main road. Charlotte had disguised herself as best she could with a baseball cap and sunglasses borrowed from Lisa's closet. Her appearance had changed enough in the past 2 weeks, sun-darkened skin, calloused hands, simpler clothes, that she hoped no one would recognize her as the society heiress who disappeared on her wedding day. Riverdale, the small town nearest to Stonebridge Stables, was a typical rural community. One main street lined with shops, a diner, a small supermarket, and a feed store. As Jack parked outside the latter, Charlotte felt her anxiety spike. You okay? Jack asked, noticing her tension. You look like you're about to face a firing squad. Charlotte forced a smile. I'm fine. It's been a while since I've been around people. Jack studied her for a moment. You know, whatever you're running from, it might not be as bad as you think. People make mistakes. They forgive. If only it were that simple, Charlotte thought. Her disappearance had likely been front-page news in Meadowbrook. Richard would be furious. Her father worried sick. She couldn't imagine the scandal that must have erupted after she fled. Let's just get what we need and go, she said, pulling the cap lower over her eyes. The feed store was thankfully quiet, with only a bored-looking teenage clerk and an elderly man browsing the selection of work gloves. Jack moved through the aisles efficiently, selecting items from a list he pulled from his pocket. Charlotte trailed behind him, helping to carry smaller items. At the checkout, the clerk perked up. Hey, Jack. Haven't seen you in a while. Been busy, Jack replied tersely, placing his items on the counter. The clerk's curious gaze shifted to Charlotte. And who's this? Don't think I've seen you around before. Before Charlotte could respond, Jack cut in. This is Charlie. She's helping out at the farm while Tom's laid up. Nice to meet you, Charlie, the clerk said, extending a hand. Charlotte shook it briefly, mumbling a greeting, her heart pounding. The clerk seemed to accept Jack's explanation and began ringing up their purchases. Charlotte breathed a sigh of relief as they loaded the supplies into the truck. One stop down, Jack said, climbing into the driver's seat. Need to get some groceries next. The supermarket was more crowded, and Charlotte felt exposed despite her disguise. She kept her head down, focusing on pushing the cart while Jack selected items. They were nearly finished when a loud voice called out from across the store. "Ark? Stoneridge? As I live and breathe?" Charlotte turned to see a middle-aged woman with bottle blonde hair and a too bright smile bearing down on them. Jack's expression tightened, but he managed a polite nod. "Hello, Barb," he said without enthusiasm. "Where have you been hiding yourself?" Barb asked, her gaze sliding from Jack to Charlotte with undisguised curiosity. "And who's this lovely young lady?" "Charlie," Jack said tersely. "She works for me." "Does she now?" Barb's smile turned knowing. "And lives at the farm too, I bet?" Charlotte saw Jack's jaw clench. "We should get going," he said, deliberately ignoring Barb's implication. "Lots to do at the farm." "Oh, of course," Barb said, still smiling that too wide smile. "But Jack, you really should bring your friend to the Harvest Festival next weekend. Everyone would love to meet her." "We'll think about it," Jack replied, already turning the cart toward the checkout. "Nice to meet you, Charlie," Barb called. After them, not bothering to lower her voice. "You've got yourself a good man there, even if he is a bit rough around the edges." Charlotte felt her cheeks heat as she followed Jack to the checkout line. "Friend of yours?" she asked quietly. "Town gossip," Jack muttered. "By dinner, half of Riverdale will be speculating about my new girlfriend." "I'm sorry," Charlotte said. "I didn't mean to cause problems." Jack's expression softened. "You didn't. Small towns just run on gossip. Nothing we can do about it." They paid for the groceries and headed back to the truck. As Jack was loading the bags into the back, Charlotte froze. Across the street, at the small newsstand outside the local pharmacy, she spotted a familiar face on the front page of a newspaper. Her face. Without thinking, she crossed the street and picked up the paper. The headline made her stomach drop. "Bennett heiress still missing. Fiancé offers reward for information." Beneath the headline was a photo of Charlotte from the rehearsal. Dinner, smiling stiffly next to Richard, and another of Richard looking appropriately concerned as he spoke to reporters. The article was datelined Meadowbrook, just 30 miles away. "Charlie?" Charlotte jumped at Jack's voice behind her. She quickly folded the paper and turned to face him. "Sorry, I wanted to check the weather forecast," she lied. Jack's eyes narrowed, but he didn't press the issue. "Come on, we should get back before the ice cream melts." The drive back to the farm was quiet. Charlotte lost in thought as she processed what she'd seen. Richard was looking for her, publicly, loudly, playing the part of the concerned fiancé. She knew him well enough to know it was all for show. His pride had been wounded, and more importantly, his plans for the Bennett fortune had been derailed. He wouldn't rest until he found her. And her father. The article hadn't mentioned him, her specifically, but he must be beside himself with worry. Charlotte felt guilt twist in her stomach. She needed to let him know she was safe, but how could she do that without exposing her whereabouts? "You want to talk about it?" Jack asked, breaking the silence as they turned onto the farm's long driveway. "About what?" Charlotte hedged. "Whatever's. Got you looking like you've seen a ghost." Jack glanced at her. "That wasn't the weather forecast you were reading, was it?" Charlotte hesitated. Jack had been kind to her, had given her a place to stay when she had nowhere else to go. He deserved the truth, or at least part of it. "No," she admitted. "It was a news story about me." Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You in some kind of trouble with the law?" "No, nothing like that," Charlotte assured him quickly. "Here's like I told you before, I ran away from my wedding. My fiancé, he's looking for me. And that's a bad thing because..." Charlotte stared out the window at the passing countryside. "He doesn't love me. He never did. He just wanted..." She trailed off, not wanting to mention her family's wealth. "What?" Jack pressed. "What did he want from you?" "Security," Charlotte said after a moment. "Financial security. He saw me as an investment, not a person." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "And your family? They're not worried about you?" Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes. "My father is the only family I have left. And yes, he's probably worried sick. But if I contact him, my fiancé will find out. He's persuasive. He'll convince my father that I'm just confused, that I need to come home and follow through with the wedding." Is your father the kind of man who would force you to marry someone you don't love? No, Charlotte said, thinking of her father's words on her wedding day. But he's not well. Richard, my fiancé, he can be very convincing, and my father wants so badly to see me settled before... She couldn't finish the sentence. Jack pulled the truck up to the farmhouse and turned off the engine, but made no move to get out. Look, Charlie, or whatever your real name is, I don't need to know the details. But if you're in danger, if this guy might come looking for you here... He won't, Charlotte said quickly. He has no idea where I am. I don't even know how I ended up here myself. She managed a weak smile. Random chance, or fate, Jack said quietly, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. For a moment they sat in silence, something unspoken passing between them. Then Jack cleared his throat and opened his door. We should get these groceries inside before that ice cream really does melt. Charlotte helped him unload the truck, her mind racing. She needed to contact her father somehow to let him know she was safe, without revealing her location. But how? As they unpacked the groceries in the kitchen, Jack seemed to be debating something internally. Finally, he spoke. The Harvest Festival that Barbie mentioned, it's next Saturday. The whole town turns out for it. Charlotte looked up from the can of beans she was shelving. Okay. If you wanted to, we could go. Together. Jack kept his eyes on the grocery bag he was emptying. Might be good for you to get out, meet some people, and it would give the gossip something real to talk about instead of making things up. Charlotte was surprised by the invitation, and even more surprised by how much she wanted to accept. Are you asking me on a date, Jack Stoneridge? Jack's ears turned slightly red. I'm asking if you want to go to a small town festival with corn dogs and hay rides and probably some terrible local band. Call it whatever you want. Charlotte couldn't help but smile. I'd like that. Jack nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Good. It's settled then. As they finished putting away the groceries, Charlotte felt a strange mixture of emotions. Fear that someone at the festival might recognize her. Guilt about her father's worry. But also, unexpectedly, happiness. In just 2 weeks, Stoneridge Stables had begun to feel like home, and Jack was becoming someone important to her, someone she trusted. For the first time since fleeing her wedding, Charlotte allowed herself to imagine a future, not just hiding out until the scandal died down, but actually building a new life. A simpler life, perhaps, but one that was truly hers. The week leading up to the Harvest Festival passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Charlotte threw herself into her chores with renewed energy, eager to prove to Jack and to herself that she belonged at Stoneridge Stables. Jack, for his part, seemed to have softened even further toward her. He began teaching her more advanced skills, how to check a horse for lameness, how to properly clean tack, even how to drive the ancient tractor that he used to move hay bales. Each new responsibility felt like a vote of confidence, a sign that he trusted her capabilities. In the evenings, they often shared meals in the farmhouse kitchen. Jack would cook, Charlotte would clean up, and they would talk about the farm, about horses, about Jack's childhood growing up in Riverdale. Charlotte was careful to keep details about her own past vague, but she shared genuine stories about her mother, about her love of animals, about her dreams of a life less constrained by expectations. On the night before the festival, as they sat on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset, Jack surprised her with a question. Why didn't you ever leave before? If you were so unhappy with your life with this Richard guy, why wait until the wedding day to run? Charlotte considered the question carefully. I think I was afraid, she admitted. I've never really been on my own before. My whole life was planned out. Where I would live, who I would marry, what I would do. The path was so clear that I didn't know how to step off it. Until you did, Jack observed. Charlotte nodded. Until I did. And now? She gestured to the farm spread out before them, the golden light of sunset painting the fields and buildings in warm hues. Now I'm here, and for the first time I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Jack was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. You've changed since you got here, he said finally. "That first day, I thought you wouldn't last until sunset. Now, you belong here." The simple words filled Charlotte with warmth. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot coming from you." Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment Charlotte thought Jack might lean in closer, but then he stood abruptly, breaking the spell. "Better get some rest," he said, his voice slightly gruff. "Big day tomorrow." Charlotte nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Good night, Jack." "Good night, Charlie." As she walked back to the guest house, Charlotte wondered if she had imagined the tension between them. Was it possible that Jack felt something for her beyond mere friendship? And if he did, what would happen when he discovered who she really was? The thought kept her awake long into the night. The Riverdale Harvest Festival transformed the small town's Central Park into a bustling carnival ground. Booths selling everything from homemade jams to handcrafted furniture lined the perimeter. A stage had been set up at one end for local musicians, and the smell of barbecue and fried foods filled the air. Charlotte had spent extra time getting ready that morning, washing her hair with scented shampoo borrowed from Lisa's bathroom and selecting the nicest outfit she could find in the guest house closet. A simple blue sundress that brought out the color of her eyes. She'd even applied a touch of makeup, just enough to enhance her features without being obvious. When she emerged from the guest house, Jack was waiting by his truck, dressed in clean jeans and a button-down shirt that made him look even more handsome than usual. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look different," he said, seeming to struggle for words. Charlotte smiled nervously. "Good different or bad different?" "Good," Jack said quickly. "Definitely good." The drive to town was filled with a charged silence, both of them aware that this outing was different from their usual trips for supplies. This was social, intentional, a date, even if neither of them had used the word. As they arrived at the festival, Charlotte felt her anxiety return. She hadn't been in a crowd since her wedding day, and the fear of being recognized was still present, but the sun was shining. Jack was beside her, and for once she decided to focus on the present moment rather than worrying about what might go wrong. The festival was charming in its small-town simplicity. Charlotte found herself genuinely enjoying the craft booths, the local music, the friendly, if curious, greetings from townspeople who clearly knew Jack but were too polite to ask outright about his companion. "Everyone's staring," Charlotte whispered as they walked past a group of older women who were not subtle in their interest. "Let them," Jack replied with a shrug. "They've been trying to marry me off for years. You're doing them a favor by giving them something to speculate about." Charlotte laughed, glad to be of service. They sampled food from various booths, watched a surprisingly entertaining pie-eating contest, and listened to a local band that was actually quite good. Jack bought Charlotte a small wooden horse from a craftsman's booth when he caught her admiring it, and the simple gift touched her more than any of the expensive jewelry Richard had given her over the years. As the afternoon wore on, they wandered toward a quieter area of the park where several picnic tables had been set up in the shade of large oak trees. Jack bought them lemonades, and they sat side by side, watching children play in a nearby field. "Having fun?" Jack asked, his shoulder close enough to Charlotte's that she could feel the warmth of him through her dress. "More than I expected," she admitted. "It's all so simple," Jack suggested with a raised eyebrow. "Real," Charlotte corrected him. "There's nothing pretentious about it. People are just enjoying themselves, being together. It's nice." Jack smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Yeah, it is." From across the park, the band began playing a slower song, and couples moved to the open area before the stage to dance. "Would you—" Jack cleared his throat. "Do you want to dance?" Charlotte's heart skipped. "I'd like that." They walked to the makeshift dance floor, and Jack hesitantly placed his hands on her waist. Charlotte rested her arms on his shoulders, and they began to sway to the music. It wasn't the elaborate waltz she'd been taught for society balls, but there was an honesty to it that made those formal dances seem hollow in comparison. "I'm not much of a dancer," Jack admitted, his voice low. "You're doing fine," Charlotte assured him, moving a fraction closer. As the song continued, Charlotte felt herself relaxing into Jack's embrace. His strength, His steadiness, the scent of him, clean laundry, sunshine, and something uniquely Jack, all combined to make her feel safe in a way she hadn't in a long time. Jack's eyes held hers, and the rest of the festival seemed to fade away. There was only this moment, this music, this man whose arms felt increasingly like home. When the song ended, neither of them moved immediately. Jack's gaze dropped to Charlotte's lips, and she found herself leaning forward slightly. Heart racing, Jack Stoneridge. The moment shattered as Barb from the supermarket appeared beside them, her smile wide and knowing. "I'm so glad you two could make it. And Charlie, don't you look lovely?" Charlotte stepped back from Jack, embarrassed. To be caught in such an intimate moment. Jack's expression tightened with annoyance. "Hello, Barb," he said with forced politeness. "I was just telling everyone how Jack finally brought a young lady to the festival," Barb continued, seemingly oblivious to their discomfort. "It's been, what, 5 years since Amanda left? High time you moved on, I say." Charlotte felt Jack tense beside her. "Barb," he said, his voice low with warning. "Oh, I'm sorry." Barb's hand flew to her mouth in a gesture of manufactured regret. "Has Jack not told you about Amanda? His fiancée, well, ex-fiancée, I suppose." Charlotte looked at Jack in surprise. "You were engaged," Jack's jaw clenched. "A long time ago, it's not important." "Not important," Barb laughed. "Honey, she left him at the altar, ran off with his best friend the day before the wedding, broke his heart, something terrible." Charlotte felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. Jack had been left by a runaway bride. No wonder he'd been so skeptical of her story, so reluctant to trust her. "If you'll excuse us," Jack said tightly, taking Charlotte's elbow and steering her away from Barb, whose expression was a mixture of satisfaction and faux concern. They walked in silence to a quiet area beneath a large tree, away from the crowds. Jack's face was like thunder, his eyes avoiding hers. "Jack," Charlotte said softly, "I'm sorry, I had no idea." "It was a long time ago," Jack repeated, his voice flat. "I don't talk about it." "Why didn't you tell me?" Charlotte asked. "When I told you about running from my wedding?" "Because it's not the same thing," Jack snapped. Then more quietly, "Amanda didn't run because she was being forced to marry someone she didn't love. She ran because she loved someone else." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with pain and unresolved grief. Charlotte felt her heart ache for Jack, understanding now the source of his initial distrust, his reluctance to let her stay. "I'm so sorry," she said again, wishing she could find better words. "That must have been awful for you." Jack shrugged, but the tension in his shoulders told a different story. "Like I said, it was a long time ago, 5 years, I'm over it." But Charlotte could see that he wasn't, not completely. The wound had scarred over, but Barb's casual cruelty had ripped it open again. "Do you want to leave?" Charlotte asked gently. "We could go back to the farm." Jack shook his head. "No, I'm not going to let Barb ruin the day." He looked at Charlotte then, his eyes softening. "You were having a good time. I want you to see the fireworks later." His consideration touched her deeply. Despite his own discomfort, he was thinking of her enjoyment. It was such a contrast to Richard, who had always put his own desires first. "Okay," Charlotte agreed, "but only if you're sure." Jack offered her a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sure, come on. I think the pie judging is about to start. Lisa always says you haven't lived until you've tried Edna Miller's apple pie." They rejoined the festival, the moment that had passed between them during the dance now overlaid with a new understanding. Charlotte found herself watching Jack more closely, noticing the way he kept a slight distance between them, how his laugh didn't quite sound natural when townspeople made jokes about them being a couple. The pain of his past. Rejection was still there, influencing his every interaction. And Charlotte was painfully aware that she represented exactly what had hurt him before, another runaway bride with secrets. As the afternoon turned to evening, they watched the pie judging. Edna Miller won, as apparently she did every year. Played a few carnival games. Jack won a small stuffed horse at the ring toss and gave it to a delighted little girl nearby, and found a good spot on a grassy hill to watch the coming fireworks. As they spread a blanket on the ground, Charlotte decided to take a risk. Jack deserved more honesty from her, even if she couldn't tell him everything. "My real name isn't Charlie," she said quietly, as they sat side by side. waiting for the sky to darken. Jack turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "I figured as much. It's Charlotte," she continued. "Charlotte. B." She couldn't quite bring herself to say Bennett. "Charlotte," Jack repeated, as if testing the name. "It suits you better than Charlie." "You're not angry that I lied?" Jack was quiet for a moment. "Everyone has secrets. You had your reasons." Charlotte drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I don't want to keep things from you, Jack. You've been so kind to me, given me a place to stay, taught me so much. But you're still not ready to tell me everything," Jack observed, not accusingly, just stating a fact. "No," Charlotte admitted. "Not yet. But I promise I'm not hiding anything sinister. I'm not a criminal or a con artist or anything like that." She managed a small smile. "Just a woman who made a mess of her life and is trying to figure out how to fix it." Jack nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He looked up at the darkening sky. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing a pretty good job of fixing it so far." The simple vote of confidence warmed Charlotte from within. "Thank you. That means a lot." They sat in companionable silence as the first stars appeared overhead. Around them, other families and couples were settling onto blankets, children running with glow sticks, excitement building for the fireworks display. "Can I ask you something?" Charlotte said after a while. "You can ask, doesn't mean I'll answer." Charlotte smiled at his typical directness. "What Barb said about Amanda leaving with your best friend? Is that why you live alone now? Why you keep to yourself?" Jack sighed, leaning back on his elbows. "Partly, but mostly it's just that the farm keeps me busy. Hard to maintain a social life when you're up before dawn and in bed by 9 most nights." "But you never tried again? After Amanda?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Dated a few women, nothing serious, nothing that stuck." He glanced at her. "What about you? Before the fiancé you ran away from, were there others?" Charlotte shook her head. "Not really. I was sheltered growing up. My father was protective after my mother died. I dated a little in college, but nothing meaningful." She thought of Richard, of the calculated way he had pursued her, cultivating her father's approval while subtly isolating her from making her own decisions. "My relationship with Richard was more arranged than romantic, looking back." "Arranged?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "What is this? The 1800s?" Charlotte laughed softly. "Not literally arranged, but strongly encouraged. By my father, by his parents, by our social circle." She plucked at a blade of grass. "My father's health hasn't been good. He wanted to see me settled with someone he approved of. And this Richard, he seemed like good husband material." "On paper," Charlotte replied. "Successful, ambitious, from a good family." She shook her head. "But he didn't love me. And I didn't love him. I just didn't realize how important that was until I was standing in that church, about to make the biggest mistake of my life." "So you ran," Jack said, and there was no judgment in his voice this time. "So I ran," Charlotte echoed, "and somehow ended up in your stable." Jack's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Lucky stable." The first firework shot into the sky before Charlotte could respond, exploding in a shower of red and gold. The crowd around, them oodenad, children squealing with delight. More fireworks followed, bathing the hillside in flashes of colored light. In the alternating darkness and brilliance, Charlotte was aware of Jack beside her, solid and real. During a particularly spectacular burst of blue and silver, she felt his hand cover hers on the blanket. Her heart stuttered, then raced as his fingers intertwined with hers. Charlotte turned her head to find Jack looking at her, not at the fireworks. The colored lights played across his face, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. "Charlotte," he said, her full name on his lips, sending a shiver through her. "Yes?" she whispered. Before he could answer, a series of loud booms announced the finale, the sky erupting in a frenzy of light and color. The crowd cheered, the moment suspended in a wash of noise and brilliance. When the last echo faded and darkness returned, Jack's hand was still holding hers. Neither of them moved to stand as families around them began packing up blankets and collecting sleepy children. "We should probably head back," Jack said finally, though he made no move to get up. "Probably," Charlotte agreed, equally reluctant to break the spell of the moment. When they finally rose and folded the blanket, Jack kept hold of her hand as they walked back to his truck. The simple contact felt significant, a boundary crossed. The drive back to the farm was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than before, expectant, charged with possibility. Jack's hand rested on the gear shift, and occasionally his fingers would brush against Charlotte's knee, each casual touch sending warmth through her. When they reached the farm, Jack parked in front of the guest house rather than the main house. He turned off the engine but didn't immediately move to get out. "I had a good time today," he said, his deep voice soft in the darkness of the truck cab. "So did I," Charlotte replied. "Thank you for inviting me." Jack turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light from the porch. "Charlotte, I'm not good at this He gestured vaguely between them. "Whatever this is." Charlotte's heart raced. "What do you think it is?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort with expressing emotions. "I don't know. I just know that when you showed up in my stable, I thought you were trouble. And I was right." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "But maybe the kind of trouble I need." It was the closest thing to a declaration she was likely to get from him, and it made Charlotte's heart sore. "I think," she said carefully, "that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places." Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, with a deliberateness that made her breath catch, he leaned across the space between them and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was giving her a chance to pull away. But Charlotte had no desire to retreat. Instead, she leaned into the kiss, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. Jack deepened the kiss, one hand cradling the back of her head, fingers threading through her hair. Charlotte felt dizzy with the rush of emotions. Desire, yes, but also tenderness, safety, and something that felt dangerously like the beginning of love. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't have done that," he murmured, though he made no move to pull away. "Why not?" Charlotte asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you're still running from something." "Because sooner or later, you'll have to go back and face whatever it is." His eyes searched hers in the darkness. "Because I don't do well when people leave." The raw honesty in his voice made Charlotte's chest ache. "Jack, But he silenced her with another brief kiss. "Don't make promises you can't keep," he said quietly. "Let's just see where this goes, day by day." Charlotte nodded, understanding his caution, his need to protect himself from another heartbreak. "Day by day," she agreed. They shared one. More kiss. Softer this time. A good night rather than a passion before Jack walked her to the guest house door. "Good night, Charlotte," he said, her name on his lips still new and thrilling. "Good night, Jack," she replied, watching him walk back to his truck and drive the short distance to the main house. Inside the guest house, Charlotte leaned against the closed door, her heart full and her mind racing. She had come to Stonebridge, stables by chance, fleeing one life without any plan for what would come next. And now, against all odds, she was falling for the gruff, kind-hearted man who had taken her in. But Jack was right. She was still running. Richard was still searching. For her father was still worried. The life she had left behind was waiting for her to return and face the consequences of her actions. The thought of leaving Stonebridge, of leaving Jack, made her physically ache. But could she really stay? Could she build a new life here, as Charlotte, instead of Charlie, without her past eventually catching up to her? With these questions swirling in her mind, Charlotte prepared for bed, her lips still tingling from Jack's kisses, her heart torn between the joy of the present and the uncertainty of the future. In the next morning, Charlotte woke to the familiar sounds of the farm, roosters crowing, horses nickering, the distant rumble of the tractor. For a moment she lay in bed, reliving the events of the previous day. The festival, the fireworks, and most of all, the kisses she had shared with Jack. What would happen now? Would things be awkward between them? Would Jack pretend nothing had happened? Or would they move forward into this new, uncharted territory together? Charlotte dressed quickly in her now familiar work clothes and headed to the stable, eager and nervous to see Jack. She found him in the tack room, cleaning a saddle with practiced movements. "Morning," she said, hovering in the doorway. Jack looked up, and the warm smile that spread across his face immediately eased her anxiety. "Morning," he replied, setting aside his work and crossing the room to her. Without hesitation, he leaned down and pressed a brief kiss to her lips. "Sleep well?" Charlotte felt a blush heat her cheeks. "Yes, thank you." "Good." Jack gestured to the stable. "We've got a busy day, 3 new horses arriving this afternoon, and the farriers coming at 10. Just like that, they fell into their usual routine, but with subtle differences. Jack's hand would linger on her shoulder when he passed her a tool. Their fingers would brush when they worked side by side. At lunch, he sat closer to her than usual at the kitchen table, his knee pressing against hers. It was comfortable and exciting all at once, this new dimension to their relationship. Charlotte found herself smiling for no reason, humming as she worked, earning curious glances from Jack that quickly turned into small smiles of his own. The week that followed was the happiest of Charlotte's life. During the day, they worked, together as they always had, but with the added pleasure of stolen kisses in the barn aisle, hands held while walking the fence line, and lingering glances across the paddock. In the evenings, they would have dinner together in the farmhouse, then sit on the porch watching the sunset, talking about everything and nothing. Jack began opening up more about his past, stories of his childhood on the farm, of his parents, and their dreams for Stonebridge, of his sister Lisa's determination to forge her own path in the city. Charlotte in turn shared more of herself, careful to avoid specifics that might reveal her identity, but honest about her feelings, her dreams, her regrets. One evening, as they sat on a blanket near the pond at the edge of the property, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Jack asked her a question she wasn't prepared for. "Have you thought about letting your father know you're safe?" Charlotte stiffened. "Why do you ask?" Jack shrugged, his arm around her shoulders. "You said he's not well. He must be worried sick about you. It's been nearly a month now." Guilt washed over Charlotte. Jack was right. Her father's heart condition was serious, and the stress of her disappearance couldn't be good for him. She had been so wrapped up in her new life, in her growing feelings for Jack, that she had pushed thoughts of home aside. "I wouldn't know how to contact him without Richard finding out," she said finally. "My phone, my wallet, everything is back, at where I left it." Jack was quiet for a moment. "You could use my phone. Or we could drive somewhere farther away, use a public phone." Charlotte appreciated his willingness to help, but she shook her head. "It's not that simple. Even if I could talk to him without Richard knowing, what would I say? That I'm safe, but I can't tell him where I am, that I'm not coming back. It would just be cruel." "But not knowing at all is crueler," Jack pointed out gently. "Take it from someone who's lost both parents. Time is precious. If your father is as ill as you say, can you really risk never speaking to him again?" Charlotte felt tears fill her eyes. Jack was right, and she knew it. She had been selfish, thinking only of her own freedom, her own happiness. "I'll think about it," she promised. Jack kissed her temple. "That's all I ask." That night, alone in the guest house, Charlotte couldn't sleep. Jack's words kept replaying in her mind. What if her father's condition had worsened due to the stress of her disappearance? What if something happened to him and she never got to say goodbye? The thought was unbearable. By morning, she had made a decision. She would call her father, just to let him know she was safe and well. She wouldn't reveal where she was, at least not yet, but she would give him the peace of mind of knowing she hadn't been harmed. After morning chores, she approached Jack in the stable. "I want to do it," she said without preamble. "Call my father." Jack nodded, understanding immediately. "We can drive to the next town over. Less chance of anyone overhearing." "Thank you," Charlotte said, grateful for his support. They finished the essential work and then set out in Jack's truck. driving in the opposite direction from Riverdale to a slightly larger town called Oak Ridge. Jack pulled into the parking lot of a shopping center and pointed to a payphone near the entrance, one of the few still in operation in the age of cell phones. "I'll wait in the truck," he offered. "Give you some privacy." Charlotte nodded gratefully and walked to the phone booth, her heart pounding. She had memorized her father's private line years ago, and now she dialed it with trembling fingers, feeding quarters into the slot. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Charlotte was about to hang up, thinking perhaps her father was resting or at a doctor's appointment, when a familiar voice answered. Bennett residence. It was Martha, the housekeeper who had worked for their family since Charlotte was a child. Hearing her voice brought a rush of homesickness that Charlotte hadn't expected. "Martha," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "It's Charlotte." There was a gasp, then a flurry of questions. "Miss Charlotte? Is that really you? Where are you? Are you all right? Everyone's been so worried." "I'm fine, Martha, truly," Charlotte assured her. "I just wanted to let Father know that I'm safe. Is he there? Can I speak to him?" There was a long pause. "Oh, Miss Charlotte," Martha said, her voice suddenly heavy with emotion. "I'm so sorry to tell you this, but your father, he had a heart attack 2 weeks ago. He's in the hospital." Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. "A heart attack? Is he going to be all right?" "The doctors say he's stable, but it was a bad one. He's been asking for you." Guilt and fear crashed over Charlotte in waves. "Which hospital?" she asked urgently. "Meadowbrook Memorial. But Miss Charlotte, I should warn you, Mr. Blackwood has barely left your father's side. He's been very involved in your father's care, of course he had." Richard would see this as the perfect opportunity to ingratiate himself further with George Bennett, to position himself as the concerned, almost son-in-law. "Thank you, Martha. Please don't tell anyone I called. Charlotte hesitated. "I'll be in touch." She hung up the phone and leaned against the booth, trying to steady her breathing. Her father was in the hospital. He had suffered a heart attack, possibly brought on by the stress of her disappearance. And Richard was right there, no doubt using the situation to his advantage. Charlotte walked back to the truck in a daze. One look at her face, and Jack knew something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, as she climbed into the passenger seat. "My father," Charlotte said, her voice hollow. "He's in the hospital. He had a heart attack 2 weeks ago." Jack's expression softened with compassion. "I'm so sorry, Charlotte." "I have to go to him," she said, the decision already made. "I can't stay away. Not now." Jack nodded slowly. "I understand. Will you take me?" Charlotte asked, hating how vulnerable she sounded. "To the hospital? It's in Meadowbrook, about an hour from here." Jack hesitated for just a moment, and Charlotte realized what she was asking of him. Meadowbrook was a small city, but still much larger than Riverdale. Taking her there meant potentially being exposed to her real life, the life she had been running from. "Of course I will," Jack said firmly, starting the truck. "Just tell me how to get there." Relief washed over Charlotte. "Thank you, but Jack, there's something you should know before we go. Something I should have told you before now." Jack glanced at her as he pulled out of the parking lot. "I'm listening." Charlotte took a deep breath. "My full name is Charlotte Bennett. My father is George Bennett. He owns Bennett National Bank." She watched Jack's face carefully, seeing the surprise register, then understanding dawn in his eyes. "The Bennett heiress," he said quietly. "The one from the newspaper article you were reading that day in town?" Charlotte nodded miserably. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was afraid you would see me differently." Jack was quiet for a long moment, processing this new information. It explains a lot," he said finally. "The way you didn't know how to do simple chores, why you were so afraid of being recognized." "Are you angry?" Charlotte asked, her voice small. Jack sighed. "I wish you had trusted me enough to tell me the truth. But no, I'm not angry." He reached over and took her hand. "You're still the same person to me, the same woman who mucked out stalls until her hands blistered, the same woman who learned to ride Bella even though she was terrified, the same woman. I've been falling for over these past weeks." Tears sprang to Charlotte's eyes at his words. "Even though I lied to you?" "You didn't lie about the important things," Jack said, squeezing her hand. You didn't lie about who you are, just your circumstances. Charlotte felt a rush of gratitude and something deeper, something that had been growing steadily since that first day in the stable. "I love you, Jack," she said softly, the words escaping before she could consider them. Jack looked at her, surprise and warmth mingling in his amber eyes. He didn't say the words back, but he brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Let's go see your father," he said. The drive to Meadowbrook passed mostly in silence, Charlotte lost in thoughts and worries about what awaited them. As they entered the outskirts of the city, she began giving Jack directions to the hospital. Meadowbrook Memorial was a large, modern facility in the heart of the city. As Jack parked in the visitor's lot, Charlotte felt anxiety tighten her chest. "Richard will probably be there," she warned. "He won't be happy to see me, especially not with you." Jack's jaw tightened. "Let me worry about Richard. You just focus on your father." They entered the hospital together, Charlotte leading the way to the information desk. The volunteer at the desk looked up with a professional smile that quickly turned to shock. "Miss Bennett," she exclaimed, "everyone's been looking for you." Charlotte managed a tight smile. "I need to see my father, George Bennett. He was admitted 2 weeks ago with a heart attack." The volunteer quickly checked her computer. "Yes, of course, he's in the cardiac care unit, 6th floor, room 6112, but I should call security." "That won't be necessary," Charlotte interrupted, firmly. "Thank you." She and Jack headed for the elevators, the volunteer watching them with wide eyes. Charlotte knew it wouldn't be long before word spread that she had returned. In the elevator, Jack took her hand, a silent gesture of support that gave her strength. The doors opened on the 6th floor, and Charlotte took a deep breath before stepping into the corridor. The cardiac care unit was quiet, with nurses moving efficiently between rooms and monitors beeping softly. Charlotte approached the nurses' station, where a middle-aged woman in scrubs looked up from her computer. "I'm here to see George Bennett," Charlotte said. "I'm his daughter." The nurse's eyes widened. "Miss Bennett?" "Yes, of course. Your father has been asking for you." She glanced at Jack. "However, we're only allowing immediate family at this time." "He's with me," Charlotte said firmly. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Room 612, just down the hall on the right. The doctor will want to speak with you." Charlotte thanked her and walked down the hallway, Jack a reassuring presence at her side. Outside room 612, she paused, steeling herself for what she might find. "Do you want me to wait out here?" Jack offered. Charlotte shook her head. "No, I want you with me." She needed his strength now more than ever. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The room was private and well-appointed, with flowers on every surface and large windows overlooking the city. In the hospital bed, George Bennett looked shockingly diminished, his once robust frame thin and frail, his face pale against the white pillows. Various machines monitored his condition, tubes and wires connecting him to medical equipment. But what made Charlotte freeze in the doorway wasn't the sight of her ailing father. It was the person sitting beside the bed, holding her father's hand. Richard Blackwood looked up, his handsome face registering shock, then calculation, then a mask of concern so perfect that only Charlotte could see the cold fury beneath it. "Charlotte," he said, rising smoothly from his chair, "thank God you're safe. We've been so worried." Before Charlotte could respond, George Bennett's eyes fluttered. "Open!" He turned his head slightly, and when he saw Charlotte, his face transformed with joy. "Charlie," he whispered, using the nickname that only he and her mother had ever called her. "Is it really you?" Charlotte rushed to his bedside, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Daddy, it's me. I'm here. I'm so sorry." George Bennett raised a shaking hand to touch her cheek. "My little girl, you came back." "Of course I did," Charlotte said, taking his hand in hers. "I'm so sorry I left. I'm so sorry about everything." No, her father murmured. "I'm the one who's sorry. I never should have pushed you into that engagement. I just wanted to know you'd be taken care of after I'm gone." Richard cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. "This is a touching reunion," he said smoothly. "But George, you need to rest," the doctor said to avoid excitement. Charlotte tensed at Richard's presumptuous use of her father's first name. Before she could respond, Jack stepped forward from where he had been standing quietly by the door. "Mr. Bennett," he said respectfully. "I'm Jack Stoneridge. I've been looking after your daughter these past few weeks." George Bennett looked at Jack with interest, then back at Charlotte, a question in his tired eyes. "Jack gave me a job and a place to stay when I had nowhere else to go," Charlotte explained, smiling at Jack with warmth that didn't go unnoticed by either her father or Richard. "Then I owe you my gratitude, young man," George said sincerely, "for taking care of my Charlotte when I couldn't." Richard's face darkened. "I hardly think hiding a young woman from her family and fiancé is something to be thanked for," he said coldly. "In fact, it might be considered kidnapping." "Richard," Charlotte exclaimed, "that's ridiculous. I went to Jack's farm of my own free will. He had no idea who I was. And when he found out," Richard pressed, his voice silky with menace, "did he encourage you to contact your worried family, or did he keep you hidden away at his farm?" He said the last word with unmistakable disdain. "That's enough," George Bennett said weakly from the bed. "For Richard, I appreciate all you've done these past weeks, but I'd like some time alone with my daughter and Mr. Stoneridge." Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly. "Of course, George. I'll be right outside if you need anything." He shot Charlotte a look that promised this conversation wasn't over, then left the room, closing the door with deliberate gentleness. As soon as he was gone, George Bennett sighed heavily. "Charlotte, my dear, you've caused quite a stir." Charlotte hung her head. "I know, Daddy. I'm so sorry. I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't marry Richard." "Because you don't love him," her father said. Not a question, but a statement. "No, I don't," Charlotte admitted. "But it's more than that. Richard doesn't love me either. He only wants the bank, the Bennett name, the connection to your business." She hesitated, then added, "I overheard him at the rehearsal dinner talking about how once you were gone, all the Bennett money would be his." George Bennett's expression hardened. "I see." He turned his gaze to Jack, who had moved to stand beside Charlotte. "And you, Mr. Stoneridge, what is your interest in my daughter?" Jack met the older man's gaze steadily. "I love her, sir," he said simply. "I didn't plan to. I didn't even like her much when she first showed up in my stable." A small smile curved his lips at the memory. "But she's the strongest, most determined woman I've ever met, and the kindest." Charlotte stared at Jack in wonder. It was the first time he had said those 3 words, "I love her," and he had said them not to her, but to her father. George Bennett studied Jack for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Charlotte has always had good judgment about people," he said. "If she trusts you, that's good enough for me." He squeezed Charlotte's hand. "But we have much to discuss, my dear, about your future, about the bank, about what happens next." Charlotte nodded. "I know, Daddy, but right now you need to rest and get better. Everything else can wait." As if on cue, the door opened and a doctor entered, clipboard in hand. "Miss Bennett," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "The nurse told me you had arrived. I'm Dr. Patel, your father's cardiologist." "How is he?" Charlotte asked anxiously. Dr. Patel's expression was measured. "Your father suffered a significant myocardial infarction, a heart attack. We performed emergency surgery to place 2 stents in his coronary arteries. He's stable now, but his recovery will take time, and he'll need to make significant lifestyle changes going forward." "But he will recover," Charlotte pressed. "Barring complications, yes," Dr. Patel confirmed. "However, I should warn you that this was a serious event. Your father's heart sustained damage. He's going to need careful monitoring and support." Charlotte nodded, determination setting in. "He'll have it. I'll make sure of it." Dr. Patel smiled. "Good. Now I need to examine Mr. Bennett, so if you and your—" He glanced at Jack questioningly. "Friend," Charlotte supplied, though the word felt inadequate for what Jack was to her. "If you and your friend could step outside for a few minutes." Charlotte bent to kiss her father's forehead. "I'll be right outside, Daddy. I'm not going anywhere." George Bennett smiled weakly. "Promise?" "I promise," Charlotte said firmly. "I'm home for good." She and Jack left the room, finding Richard waiting in the hallway, his handsome face set in lines of controlled anger. "Charlotte," he said, his voice low, We need to talk. Privately. Charlotte felt Jack tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand reassuringly. It's okay, she told him. I need to do this. Jack nodded reluctantly. I'll be right here, he said, moving to sit in a nearby waiting area, his eyes never leaving Richard. Charlotte followed Richard to a small visitor's lounge that was empty. As soon as the door closed behind them, Richard's charming facade dropped completely. What the hell do you think you're doing? He hissed. Do you have any idea what you've put me through, what you've put your father through? He could have died, Charlotte. Guilt stabbed at her, but Charlotte stood her ground. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I couldn't marry you, Richard. We both know our engagement was never about love. Richard scoffed. Love? Grow up, Charlotte. Marriage isn't about love, not in our world. It's about alliances, about securing the future, about building something lasting. No, Charlotte replied firmly. That's what business partnerships are. For marriage should be about love, trust, respect, none of which existed between us. Richard's eyes narrowed. And I suppose you found all that with your farmer. The contempt in his voice was palpable. Yes, Charlotte said simply. I have. Richard laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. Charlotte Bennett, who's never worked a day in her life playing farm wife, how long do you think that will last? A month? A year? Before you're longing for the comforts you've thrown away? You've never understood me, Richard, Charlotte said sadly. Never tried to. I'm not the spoiled socialite you think I am. No? Richard raised an eyebrow. Then why did you run away instead of facing me like an adult? Why did you hide for weeks, while your father worried himself into a heart attack? The barb hit home and Charlotte flinched. That was a mistake, she admitted. I should have handled things differently, but I'm here now and I'm not going back to the life I had before. Richard stepped closer, his voice softening to the persuasive tone he used in business negotiations. Charlotte, be reasonable. Your father needs you, the bank needs you. This episode can be forgotten. We can reschedule the wedding, perhaps a smaller private ceremony. No, Charlotte interrupted firmly. There won't be a wedding, Richard. Not now, not ever. Our engagement is over. Richard's face hardened. You're making a mistake, he warned. A very costly one. Your father may have indulged your whims in the past. Your father may have indulged your whims in the past, Richard continued, his voice cold. But he won't support this foolishness. He needs someone who understands business, who can protect the Bennett legacy. Do you really think your farmer boyfriend can help with that? Charlotte lifted her chin. My father needs someone who loves him, not someone who's waiting for him to die so they can take control of his company. Richard's face darkened with anger. You ungrateful little... The door to the lounge opened and Jack stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway. Everything okay in here? He asked, his eyes fixed on Richard. We're fine, Charlotte said, stepping away from Richard. We're done talking. We're far from done, Richard snapped, but Jack moved into the room, placing himself between Charlotte and her ex-fiancé. The lady said you're done, Jack said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. For a moment Richard looked like he might argue, but something in Jack's steady gaze made him reconsider. Instead, he straightened his expensive suit jacket and forced a cold smile. This isn't over, Charlotte, he said. Your father will see reason even if you won't. With that, he brushed past them and left the lounge, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. Charlotte let out a shaky breath. Thank you, she said to Jack. I didn't like the way he was looking at you, Jack replied, his jaw tight. He seems like the kind of man who's used to getting his way. He is, Charlotte agreed, and he won't give up easily. Jack took her hands in his. Are you okay? Charlotte managed a weak smile. I think so. It's just a lot, seeing my father. Like that, knowing that my disappearance might have contributed to his condition. And then Richard... One thing at a time, Jack advised gently. Your father's doctor seemed optimistic. Let's focus on that for now. Charlotte nodded, grateful for his steady presence. You're right. And Jack, what you said to my father about loving me, A slight flush colored Jack's cheeks. "I meant it," he said simply. "I know it hasn't been long, and I know this situation is complicated, but I do love you, Charlotte. I think I have since that first week when you refused to quit despite the blisters and the exhaustion." Charlotte's heart swelled. "I love you, too," she whispered, leaning up to kiss him softly. "And we'll figure the rest out together." They returned to the hallway outside George Bennett's room just as Dr. Patel was leaving. "Miss Bennett," the doctor said, "your father is resting now, but he's asking for you. Just keep the visit brief, please. He needs his rest." "Of course, doctor." "Thank you." Charlotte turned to Jack. "Will you come in with me?" Jack shook his head. "I think you should have some time alone with your father. I'll get us some coffee from the cafeteria." Charlotte squeezed his hand gratefully and entered her father's room. George Bennett was propped up slightly on pillows, looking tired but less pale than before. "There you are," he said, his voice weak but warm. "I was afraid you might have disappeared again." Charlotte sat in the chair beside his bed, taking his hand. "No, Daddy, I promised I'd stay, and I will." George Bennett studied his daughter's face. "You've changed," he observed. "There's something different about you, a strength that wasn't there before." Charlotte smiled. "I've learned a lot these past few weeks. About work, about myself, about what really matters. And about love, it seems," her father added with a knowing look. Charlotte felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Yes, that too. Tell me about him," George requested. "This Jack Stoneridge who's stolen my daughter's heart." Charlotte told her father everything, how Jack had found her sleeping in his stable, how he'd reluctantly given her a chance to prove herself, how she'd learned to work with horses and care for the farm. She described Jack's dedication to Stoneridge stables, his kind heart beneath the gruff exterior, the way he had taught her to value herself for who she was, not what she owned. George. Bennett listened intently, a thoughtful expression on his face. When Charlotte finished, he nodded slowly. "He sounds like a good man," he said, "a man of substance, of integrity, not unlike your mother's father, who built his hardware business from nothing." A wistful smile crossed his face. "Miriam always said I was too focused on status, on appearances. She'd be pleased to see you found someone real." "You're not disappointed?" Charlotte asked hesitantly. "Jack he's not from our world." "Perhaps that's exactly what the Bennett family needs," George replied. "New blood, a different perspective." He sighed. "The truth is, Charlotte, I've been rethinking many things since my heart attack, what matters, what doesn't. And I realize now that I've been wrong about a great deal." "What do you mean?" "I pushed you toward Richard because I thought he was the kind of man who could protect you, protect our legacy. But I see now that what I was really doing was trying to control your future, the way my father controlled mine." He squeezed her hand. "You deserve to make your own choices, to find your own happiness. If this Jack Stoneridge makes you happy, then that's all I need to know." Tears filled Charlotte's eyes. "Thank you, Daddy." "There is the matter of the bank, of course," George continued, his businessman's mind never far from the family business. "Richard has been insistent about his role in its future." Charlotte stiffened. "I'm sure he has. He seemed to think that without you as his wife, he could still secure a position on the board, perhaps even as CEO eventually." George's eyes, though tired, gleamed with a hint of their old sharpness. "I've been too trusting, it seems. Richard only wants control of Bennett National," Charlotte confirmed. "He all but admitted it to me." George nodded. "I suspected as much, especially after some of the documents he's been encouraging me to sign these past 2 weeks. Thank goodness. Martha insisted I read everything carefully. He's been trying to take advantage of your condition." Charlotte felt anger rise within her. "Let's just say I've been getting a clearer picture of Richard Blackwood's character," her father replied, diplomatically. "But enough about him. What about you, Charlotte? What do you want now?" It was a question Charlotte had been asking herself ever since Jack had kissed her for the first time. Her old life, the society events, the charity boards, the endless rounds of shopping and lunches held no appeal anymore. But she couldn't deny that she cared about her father, about the bank that had been in their family for generations. "I want to help you recover," she said firmly. "And I want to learn about the bank, really learn, not just sit on the board as a figurehead. But I also... She hesitated, then continued. I also want a life with Jack. I love Stonebridge Stables. I love the work, the horses, the simplicity of it all. George Bennett smiled. Then we'll find a way to make it work. Bennett National's headquarters are only an hour from Riverdale. Perhaps a balance can be struck. Charlotte felt relief wash over her. You really mean that? I do. Her father's expression grew serious. Life is too short to waste on other people's expectations, Charlotte. Your mother knew that. It's taken me much longer to learn. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Jack stood in the doorway, holding 2 coffee cups. Sorry to intrude, he said. But the nurse says we should let Mr. Bennett rest now. George Bennett beckoned him in. Mr. Stonebridge, come in, please. I believe I owe you a proper thank you for taking care of my daughter. Jack entered somewhat awkwardly, his large frame seeming out of place in the sterile hospital room. No thanks needed, sir. Charlotte, well, she was Charlie then, earned her keep, George smiled. So she told me. Horse stables, mucking out stalls, hardly the environment I raised her in. She adapted well, Jack said, a hint of pride in his voice. Works harder than most hands I've hired over the years. I believe it. George studied Jack with interest. Charlotte tells me you run your family's horse breeding business. Yes, sir. 3 generations of Stonebridges have worked that land. A legacy business then, something we have in common. George shifted slightly in his bed, wincing at the movement. I'd like to hear more about it sometime when I'm feeling stronger. I'd be happy to tell you, Jack replied, his initial discomfort easing, or better yet, show you, once you're well enough to travel. I'd like that, George said sincerely. Then with a directness that reminded Charlotte of Jack himself, he added, You love my daughter. It wasn't a question, but Jack answered anyway. Yes, sir, I do. And your intentions? Jack glanced at Charlotte, then looked back at her father. I want to build a life with her, sir, if she'll have me. George nodded, satisfied. Good. That's what a father wants to hear. He reached for Charlotte's hand. Now I think I need that rest the nurse mentioned, but I expect to see you both tomorrow. We'll be here, Charlotte promised, bending to kiss his cheek. As they left the room, Charlotte felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her father was going to recover. He accepted Jack. He understood her desire for a different kind of life. For the first time since fleeing her wedding, Charlotte felt like she could breathe freely. That went better than I expected, Jack commented as they walked toward the elevator. Charlotte smiled. My father is a good judge of character. He always has been. I should have trusted that more. She linked her arm through his. Where are we staying tonight? I called a hotel while I was getting coffee, Jack said. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and not too far from the hospital. The thought of a real hotel room, with room service and a proper shower, was appealing after weeks of the simple facilities at the guest house. But Charlotte realized with some surprise that she didn't long for luxury the way she once might have. Sounds perfect, she said, meaning it. They were nearly to the elevator when Charlotte heard a familiar voice call her name. Turning, she saw Richard striding toward them, a hospital security guard at his side. There she is, Richard was saying to the guard. As you can see, she's clearly not well. The stress of her father's condition has affected her mental state. The security guard looked uncertain. Miss Bennett, sir, this gentleman says you're not in a condition to be making decisions for yourself or your father. Charlotte stared at Richard in disbelief. That's ridiculous. I'm perfectly fine. Charlotte, please, Richard said, his voice dripping with false concern. You disappeared for weeks without contacting anyone. You show up with a stranger. You're not thinking clearly. The only one not thinking clearly is you, Charlotte retorted. You can't possibly believe this will work. Richard turned to the security guard. See how agitated she is? I'm simply concerned for her well-being and for George's. As his future son-in-law, Charlotte interrupted firmly. Future son-in-law. Our engagement is over, Richard. My father knows and supports my decision. The security guard looked increasingly uncomfortable. Sir, if Miss Bennett says the engagement is over, she's not in her right mind, Richard insisted. And this man, he gestured dismissively at Jack, has been taking advantage of her vulnerable state. Jack, who had been watching the exchange with growing anger, stepped forward. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Charlotte has made her feelings clear. It's time for you to leave," Richard sneered. "And who's going to make me, the horse farmer?" "No," came a new voice from down the hall, "but I might have something to say about it." They all turned to see a tall woman in a perfectly tailored suit striding toward them, her high heels clicking authoritatively on the hospital floor. With her dark hair and amber eyes, the family resemblance to Jack was unmistakable. "Lisa," Jack said in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Martha called me," Lisa Stoneridge explained, coming to stand beside them. "Apparently she's been keeping an eye on things and didn't like what she was seeing." She extended her hand to Charlotte. Lisa Stoneridge, Jack's sister, and a partner at Donovan Marsh and Klein. Charlotte shook her hand, recognizing the name. "Of one of the most prestigious law firms in the state." "Charlotte Bennett, it's nice to finally meet you." Lisa smiled, then turned a cool gaze on Richard. "Mr. Blackwood, I presume? I understand you've been extremely helpful during Mr. Bennett's illness. So helpful, in fact, that you've been presenting yourself as having authority to make decisions on his behalf. Interesting, given that you have no legal standing whatsoever." Richard's confident expression faltered slightly. "I've simply been looking out for George's interests as any concerned future family member would." "Former," Charlotte corrected again. Lisa smiled thinly. "Yes, I heard that part. Now, Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you leave Miss Bennett and my brother alone, unless you'd like to discuss with hospital administration why you've been misrepresenting your relationship to a patient and attempting to interfere with his daughter's access to him." The security guard, clearly recognizing the shift in power, took a step back. "Ma'am, if there's a problem—" "There's no problem," Lisa assured him smoothly. "Mr. Blackwood was just leaving. Weren't you, Mr. Blackwood?" Richard's face had gone from confident to furious, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was outmatched. "This isn't over," he said quietly to Charlotte. "Your father will see reason eventually." "I wouldn't count on it," Charlotte replied, feeling stronger with both Jack and Lisa beside her. "Goodbye, Richard." With a final glare, Richard turned and stalked down the hallway, his expensive shoes echoing against the floor. When he was gone, Lisa turned to her brother with a raised eyebrow. "So, big brother, want to tell me why you're in a Meadowbrook hospital with the Bennett heiress?" The same Bennett heiress who, if I'm not mistaken, was all over the local news a month ago when she disappeared from her own wedding. Jack looked slightly sheepish. "It's a long story." Lisa checked her watch. "I've got time, and I'm guessing you two could use a good dinner after all that drama. My treat." Charlotte looked at Jack, who nodded. "We'd like that," she said to Lisa. "And thank you for stepping in with Richard. He can be persistent." "Men like that usually are," Lisa replied knowingly. "But they tend to back down when confronted with someone who knows exactly how many laws they're breaking." She smiled at Charlotte. "Besides, any woman who can put that look in my brother's eyes is someone I want to know better." Jack rolled his eyes, but his hand found Charlotte's, squeezing it gently. Over dinner at an upscale restaurant near the hospital, where Lisa clearly commanded respect as a regular, Charlotte and Jack took turns explaining the unusual circumstances of their meeting and everything that had happened since. Lisa listened with fascination, occasionally interrupting with questions or comments that revealed her sharp legal mind and equally sharp sense of humor. "So, let me get this straight," she said when they had finished. "You found a runaway bride in your stable, put her to work, fell in love with her, and now you're meeting her banking magnate father. Jack, when you finally decide to have a romance, you certainly don't do it halfway." Jack shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "Never been one for half measures." Lisa turned to Charlotte. "And you went from society heiress to mucking out. Horse stalls. That's quite a transformation." "The best thing that ever happened to me," Charlotte said sincerely. "For the first time in my life, I felt like I was valued for what I could do, not for my name or my father's money." Lisa studied her thoughtfully. "You know, I always wondered what kind of woman would finally break through my brother's defenses. Now I know." She raised her wine glass. "Two unexpected beginnings." They clinked glasses, and Charlotte felt a warm sense of acceptance. Jack's sister approved of her. Her father approved of Jack. Despite Richard's threats, despite the complications that still lay ahead, Charlotte felt hope blossoming in her heart. After dinner, Lisa drove them to the Grand Meadowbrook Hotel, where she had arranged a suite for them. "Martha's been feeding me information all day," she explained with a wink. As they bid her good night, Lisa pulled Charlotte aside. "My brother doesn't open up easily," she said quietly. "Not since Amanda left him. The fact that he's let you in, that means everything." "I won't hurt him," Charlotte promised. "What we have is real." Lisa smiled. "I believe you. And for what it's worth, I think you two balance each other perfectly." She hugged Charlotte, then Jack, before driving off in her sleek sports car. In their hotel suite, Charlotte kicked off her shoes with a sigh of relief. The past 24 hours had been an emotional roller coaster, from discovering her father's condition to confronting Richard to the unexpected ally they'd found in Lisa. "Your sister is amazing," she told Jack, who was looking slightly out of place in the luxurious surroundings. "She's something, all right," Jack agreed with brotherly affection. "Smart as a whip and twice as sharp. She and Martha apparently hit it off when Lisa called the house looking for me yesterday." Charlotte smiled. "Martha has been with our family since I was a child. She's practically family herself." She moved to the window, looking out at the twinkling lights of Meadowbrook. "It's strange being back here. It feels both familiar and foreign at the same time." Jack came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Having second thoughts?" Charlotte turned in his embrace. "About us? Never. About how to balance. This life with the one we've built at Stonebridge, that's the challenge." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Your father needs you. The bank is your family legacy." "But Stonebridge is your family legacy," Charlotte countered. "And it's become important to me too. Those horses, the land, the work we do there, I don't want to give that up." Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Your father mentioned that Bennett National's headquarters is about an hour from Riverdale." "Yes, that's right. And you said you want to learn about the bank, really learn." Charlotte nodded. "I do. I've always been interested in finance, but my father and Richard both tended to pat me on the head and tell me not to worry about boring business matters." Jack snorted. "Their mistake. You're one of the quickest learners I've ever met." "So what are you thinking?" Charlotte asked, curious about where his thoughts were leading. "I'm thinking that maybe, once your father is stronger, you could work at the bank part of the week and at Stonebridge the rest of the time." Jack's eyes held hers. "I'm thinking we could make this work, Charlotte, your world and mine together." Hope surged in Charlotte's heart. "You'd be willing to share me with Bennett National?" "I'd be willing to share you with anything that makes you happy," Jack replied simply. "As long as you come home to me." The word home resonated deeply with Charlotte. "Stonebridge is home now," she said softly. "You are home." Jack's expression grew serious. "I want it to be. Officially." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. "I've been carrying this around for days, waiting for the right moment." Charlotte's breath caught as Jack opened the pouch and tipped a ring into his palm. It was a simple design, a modest diamond set in a band of yellow gold that had the soft patina of age. "This was my grandmother's," Jack explained, his voice slightly rough with emotion. "My grandfather gave it to her when they first started Stonebridge Stables. She always said it represented a promise, not just between them, but to the land, to the legacy they were building." He took Charlotte's hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know this isn't the kind of ring you're probably used to." "It's perfect," Charlotte interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. Jack smiled. "Charlotte Bennett, I love you. I love your determination, your kindness, your willingness to work until your hands blister. I love the way you talk to the horses, the way you laugh at my bad jokes, the way you've made my house feel like a home again." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Build a life with me? Make Stonebridge Stables our legacy together?" "Yes," Charlotte whispered, her heart overflowing with joy. "Yes to all of it." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, a kiss that felt like a promise, a beginning, a future unfolding before them. 6 months later, The autumn air was crisp and clear, the forests surrounding Stonebridge stables ablaze with red and gold foliage. In the large paddock behind the main stable, chairs had been arranged in neat rows, with an aisle down the center decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. A simple wooden arch, entwined with more flowers, stood at the front. Inside the farmhouse, Charlotte sat at the kitchen table as Lisa put the finishing touches on her hair. She wore a simple ivory dress, nothing like the elaborate gown from her almost wedding to Richard, and her grandmother's pearl necklace. Jack's grandmother's ring gleamed on her finger. "Nervous?" Lisa asked, adjusting a small flower in Charlotte's updo. "Not at all," Charlotte replied truthfully. "This is the easiest decision I've ever made." A knock at the door heralded Martha, who entered carrying a small bouquet of late-blooming roses from the Bennett estate gardens. "Your father is ready whenever you are, Miss Charlotte," she said, her eyes misty with happiness. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." Charlotte embraced the older woman who had been such a constant in her life. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." In the months since George Bennett's heart attack, Martha had been an invaluable ally. She had helped manage the Bennett household, kept Richard at bay with a combination of politeness and steel-spined determination, and worked with George's doctors to ensure his recovery progressed smoothly. "You've never needed anyone's help to know your own mind, Miss Charlotte," Martha replied fondly. "Though I will say, this Stonebridge fellow is a vast improvement over Mr. Blackwood," Charlotte laughed. "On that, we definitely agree." She stood, smoothing her dress. The past 6 months had brought many changes. Her father, following his doctor's advice, had stepped back from day-to-day management of Bennett National, creating an opportunity for Charlotte to take a more active role. 3 days a week, she worked at the bank, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. The rest of the time, she was at Stonebridge Stables, which was flourishing. With her business acumen and Jack's expertise with horses, they had expanded the breeding program and begun offering riding lessons to local children. The guest house where Charlotte had once stayed had been converted into a small office where she could handle bank business remotely when needed. And through it all, their love had deepened, strengthened by the challenges they faced together and the future they were building. George Bennett was waiting in the living room, looking much healthier than he had in the hospital. His heart attack had been a wake-up call, and he had embraced the lifestyle changes his doctors recommended. He spent weekends at Stonebridge now, enjoying the peace of country life and developing a genuine friendship with Jack, based on mutual respect and their shared love for Charlotte. "You look beautiful," he told his daughter, his eyes bright with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud." Charlotte kissed his cheek. "I think she would have loved Jack." "I know she would have," George agreed. "She always said you had her spirit. Turns out you have her wisdom too." Outside, the small gathering of guests had taken their seats. Lisa's law partners, Jack's sister from Chicago, a few close friends from both their worlds. Even Barb from the Riverdale supermarket was there, her gossipy nature tempered by genuine happiness for the couple. Noticeably absent was Richard, who had finally backed down after George had made it clear that his relationship with Bennett National was permanently severed. Music began to play, not the traditional wedding march, but a gentle folk song performed by a local musician Jack had befriended. George offered his arm to Charlotte, and together they walked out onto the porch and down the steps toward the paddock. At the front, beneath the flower-covered arch, Jack waited. His usual work clothes had been replaced by a simple but elegant suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. But it was his expression when he saw Charlotte that took her breath away. A look of such pure love and wonder that it made her heart swell. George placed Charlotte's hand in Jack's, then took his seat in the front row beside Martha. The minister, a kindly older man from the Riverdale church, began the ceremony with words about love, partnership, and building a life together. Charlotte barely heard him. She was lost in Jack's eyes, in the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a runaway bride hiding in a stable to a woman who had found her true self, her true purpose, her true love. When the time came for vows, Jack cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Charlotte, when you showed up in my stable that night, I thought you were trouble. A ripple of laughter went through the guests. I was right, but it was the kind of trouble I needed. You challenged me, surprised me, and taught me to open my heart again. I promise to love you, support your dreams, and build our legacy together, for all the days of our life. Charlotte blinked back tears as she spoke her own vows. Jack, you saw me at my worst, exhausted, afraid, hiding from the world, and you gave me a chance to prove myself. You showed me what real strength is, what real love is. I promise to be your partner in everything, to cherish Stonebridge as my home, and to love you with all my heart for all the days of our life. They exchanged rings, a simple band for Jack that matched Charlotte's grandmother ring, and the minister pronounced them husband and wife. When Jack kissed her, Charlotte felt as if everything in her life had led to this perfect moment. The reception was held in the large barn, which had been transformed with fairy lights, flowers, and long tables, where their worlds merged seamlessly, bankers in suits sitting next to horse trainers in bolo ties, Lisa's sophisticated lawyer friends chatting with Riverdale farmers. As the evening progressed, Charlotte found a quiet moment with her father, who was watching the festivities with a contented smile. "Happy, Daddy?" she asked, sitting beside him. "More than I can say," he replied, patting her hand. "You found your place, Charlotte. Your mother always said you would, in your own time, in your own way." Charlotte looked across the barn, to where Jack was laughing with his sister, his face alight with happiness. "I never expected it would be here on a horse farm in the middle of nowhere. The heart finds home in the strangest places," George said wisely. "And speaking of the bank, I've been thinking, perhaps it's time for Bennett National to expand. Its agricultural lending division. Small farms, family operations like Stonebridge, they need financial partners who understand their unique challenges." Charlotte smiled, recognizing her father's way of further binding their worlds together. "That sounds like an excellent business opportunity," she agreed, "and I happen to know just the right consultant to help develop those programs." Later, as the evening cooled, Jack and Charlotte slipped away from the celebration and walked hand in hand to the small hilltop overlooking the farm. The buildings below were illuminated by the party lights, and beyond them the fields and forests stretched into the darkness, a kingdom of possibilities. "Mrs. Stonebridge," Jack said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Has a nice ring to it." "It does," Charlotte agreed, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Though I'm still getting used to the Bennett Stonebridge hyphen for business purposes," Jack chuckled. "As long as you're mine, you can call yourself whatever you want." Charlotte turned in his embrace. "I am yours and you're mine, that's all that matters." Above them, stars filled the clear autumn sky, witnesses to their promises, their love, their future stretching out before them, a future neither of them could have imagined that night when a desperate runaway bride had sought shelter in a horse. Stable and found so much more than she was looking for. She had found herself, she had found home, she had found love, and that was the greatest fortune of all. The end.